Coming up in this episode of the Innovating Higher Ed podcast, Dr. Norma Jones welcomes Dr. Sarah Harmon, Cañada College's OER and Zero Textbook Cost Coordinator. Dr. Harmon shows how the ZTC Wheel swaps costly textbooks for open resources, how AI instantly turns English OER into Spanish and other popular languages, and how Creative Commons keeps sharing compliant and easy to adapt. Join us as we boldly explore new frontiers in educational innovation.
I'm here with Dr. Sarah Harmon.
Thank you so much, Dr. Jones. It's always a pleasure talking to you.
I first wanted to talk about your amazing journey. We met online at the various AI consortium meetings, and what I love is your ability to address OER from such a practical and useful way. And you understand all these rules. And I started thinking, why does she always understand these rules? And then you started talking about linguistics. I kind of got it at that point because, how many languages do you speak again? And have well enough?
I mean, if we're talking about fluent, occasionally I speak English fluently. It is my native language. I am fluent in Spanish. I am fluent in Italian. I also speak some Portuguese. It's rusty. I can read some French. I am hopeless in German. So
the Romance languages.
The Romance languages. Yeah.
So you have to know structure really, really well.
Yes.
That all made sense to me after we talked.
Yeah, and it helps if the way I like to describe it is, especially when I teach a beginning Spanish students, or even when I get to the interlinguistics course and I talk to my students about syntax, I see language as a series of formulas. And that's basically how I can analyze a language. My specific research area is in historical Romance linguistics, which is to say how Latin changed into Portuguese, Spanish, French, Italian, Romanian, a few others. How that happened? Well, in order to do that, you kind of have to see the patterns. You have to see where there are idiosyncrasies, where there are minor patterns, major patterns. So that's basically looking for patterns and formulas.
A lot of times in some languages, we see the masculine and the feminine. It's like, the French, the le, la, le, right? Mm-hmm. Or the plural. And the way you described that to me as puzzle pieces totally made sense. And this is after taking many years of French and scratching my head.
Yeah, it's a really common way to think about what in linguistic terms we call as morphology. And morphology is how we put words. And in linguistic terms, we use the term lexicon as an individual piece or as the general lexicon of verbiage of a language. But if you're talking about the morphology, you're talking about how you're putting those lexicon, those words together. And if you do that, what you're looking for are morphemes, and those are like chunks of meaning. And those are basically puzzle pieces. And every language has their way of putting those puzzle pieces together.
I love that. It really helps to think about, especially when we have so many languages to deal with that have different syntaxes. Sometimes we put the adjective before the noun. Sometimes things have to agree with each other. And then sometimes you have a bunch of letters that don't sound the way they're supposed to, which is very, very difficult for, me as English is my second language. That really helped me put that in perspective. One of the things that we talked about was, I think you talked about when you were at one of your programs about computational linguistics and how that in many ways was the precursor to LLMs.
Yeah, so computational linguistics is the area of linguistics that is all about coding. And so everything that has to do with coding, that's computational linguistics. It is decidedly not my area of expertise. I am hopeless with codes. I've always been. I'm the one that when I have to update a web page, if I don't see a WYSIWYG toolbar, I'm lost. I have no idea how to put things in and how to manipulate code. It's not a language to me that I understand well. How about that? But it is through that we eventually get to the natural language processing, or NLP. And that is where we're getting large language models, which is a very difficult phrase to say, by the way.
Right? And, as a child of Silicon Valley, where you were telling how your family, right? Your father-in-law actually worked with some of the names that we see, emblazoned in our brains when we think Apple, when we think the beginnings of what we understand as Silicon Valley and the power that comes out of there, the computational power. How do you think that and, your father watching Star Trek, all of that kind of set you up for a lot of how AI and the way you work with AI now?
I think there's two different veins there. For my own story, I really see we're like less than 5 years away from having the ship's computer that we saw in Star Wars. And certainly
Yes.
I got and I certainly saw that growing up. My dad was a big Star Trek fan. He was the original series fan. He also liked Next Generation. Of course, I grew up with Next Generation. So just having that computer that you can call out to and say, run this simulation, do these activities or tasks, create this Earl Grey tea hot or whatever food you're trying to have. We either already have it now with Siri, Alexa, Google Assistant, whatever, all of them, right? Copilot, Cortana before that. We either already have that or we are about to get there in a big way in these next couple years, really. I mean, within 5 years, we definitely will have most of that already, the way things are changing. And certainly, I mean, just hook it up to a 3D printer that can print out food stuff. You'll have your food replicator. It's basically there. So that's that side of things. When it comes to the family I'm married into, yes, they have been Silicon Valley lifers. Quite literally, my father-in-law was part of some of the groups in the military that were working on coding that eventually came to be what we now call as software engineering. He certainly was in that realm very early on. I have to remind my husband sometimes that most of us who were born in the mid to late 70s, most of us did not have fancy computers growing up. And if you did have a computer, it probably was a Commodore 64 at best.
Right.
I certainly didn't have a computer until I think I was in middle school is when my family finally got one. I mean, it was a while. He literally had a computer from the time he was born. Like, this is something he and his younger sister were brought up with. And so to have these people in my life, and then of course, my friends, so many of us have either direct relations that are working for these Silicon Valley companies, their family, their friends, their neighbors, everybody. Yes, absolutely.
Do you remember that computer from Radio Shack that was about slightly bigger than the Texas Instrument calculator, and it was soft keyboard? It was like a membrane keyboard, and you had to practically like press your entire knuckle into it to get it to work.
I do remember that.
I forgot what that was called.
No idea. If I go into the other room and ask my husband, not only will he know it, he probably had 4 of them.
That's amazing. I remember having that one as our family's first computer. Had to hook it up to the TV, sit really close, right? And try to puzzle out I don't think it was in the 8-bit. It was probably like monochromatic.
Oh, yeah. Easily. My middle brother recently showed a picture. We were going through some family pictures and just, I saw a picture of our very first computer, which was, I think, oh gosh, it certainly was running DOS. It was not even running Windows.
Mm-hmm.
And it was so old and connected technically to the phone. Like, you had to manually plug the phone line in order to connect the modem and the whole 9 yards. Yeah.
And I remember I was super fancy because when I went to UC Santa Barbara, my sister was nice enough to get me, the monitor that wasn't green, but the orange one?
Yes, that's the one we had.
I know. Fancy, right?
Fancy.
Oh my gosh. That was amazing to have that type of tech back then. And now we look at this, it's so light years ahead.
Oh, absolutely. Just our smartphones alone are literal supercomputers in comparison.
Right. And it's right in our hands. It's the size of an index card. And we could do so much with this thing. And it's happened over what? So from the 80s till now, maybe over 40 years, right?
Approximately, yeah.
So I'm going to kind of take a left turn here. Do you think one of the areas that we might be hesitant about AI adoption is the speed at which it moves? Because if you think about it, we went from, remember those old suitcase phones?
Yes.
or that big, huge one that was like the size of
A brick?
a brick, yeah, the brick phones, to this, but it took, 30 years.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that's one of the issues? Because AI is moving so much faster.
I definitely think that's something that humans in general, like we love new things, we love the bright, shiny things. But when there's so much change so quickly, we do get fearful a little bit. And that is certainly something that we see time and again with all aspects of technology. And of course, when we talk technology, I'm not talking about the thing with silicon chips in it. I'm talking about anything, any tool, any way of life that is drastically changed by a different process or a tool or something. Humans do have a tendency to, at the first, yeah, this sounds really good, but wait, we can't go too fast. So I think there are lots of things that are connected to that. Yeah.
We're curious and skeptical about most any technology, right? I think I still have people I know who refuse to use smartphones.
Yeah.
They do it on purpose, not because they just don't want to upgrade their technology, if that makes sense.
No, it's true. My 80-plus-year-old dad only got a smartphone about 6-8 months ago, in part because he figured if there was an emergency, it would be good to have it around. Although admittedly, he doesn't have it on him most of the time, and it's certainly not turned on, But yes, there's plenty of and that has nothing to do with his age. That has to do with his personality, by the way. That's just his personality, and there's plenty of people like that.
So what do you think then, being in education, being one of our leaders in OER and ZTC, because one of the things that I remember our chancellor talking about is AI and ZTC. These are the things that are going to be hand in hand in how we better support more and more students across California.
Yeah, there's definitely a connection there. And just to start off with respect to OER, if for those that don't know, Open Educational Resources, OER. And I like to describe it as the textbook, the homework platforms, everything, but they are not produced by standard publishers. They are not behind paywalls. They are open access, meaning anybody with an internet connection can gain access to that textbook. They are digital, yes. Usually there are ways to have some kind of inexpensive paper or hard copy. You can remix them. You can adapt them to your needs. They are, and I'd love to say they are the future, but in fact, they are the present. They've been around for well over 20 years in some cases. We have had these types of resources for some time. The next step is not just being able to create customized versions, which we're already doing, but to do so in ways that allow for creativity. And I'll give you a good example. I'm part of a writing team that has been putting together first year and second year collegiate Spanish. We have textbooks, we have homework platforms, Tarea Libre and Entrada Libre. Entrada Libre is the second year, Tarea Libre is the first year. We're pretty much writing everything. We are a group of people who write. I mean, that is kind of what we do. But every once in a while, you get stuck on how to present this grammar in a different way, or to, think of 3 more exercises to practice that point. Or on the other side, you have an image in your head that you really would like to use for that reading or that exercise or whatever, but you can't find it in a way that is usable in an open educational resource. Many images are copyrighted, but even still, or sometimes there's images that are there, but they're not quite right. So being able to harness the power of artificial intelligence in some way, shape, or form to help you write, to help you find that image or create that image, these are the ways that we can make our materials more meaningful. And then to follow on that is then you can get your students involved in going into open pedagogical practices, which means that you are, as the instructor, you are guiding your students, but they are integrally involved in the work themselves. They're the ones helping to create the textbook or the test questions or what have you. It's meaningful to them. Well, you can use artificial intelligence, whether it's chatbots or image generators or so many different things to help them in this process.
You talk about asking students and involving them in this process. Can you describe how that works? That just blew my mind.
It is really a fun thing. And in fact, if anybody wants to learn more about it, Open Education Global, OE Global, is a huge fountain of information for this. And their website is oeglobal.org. They are fantastic. They have tons of resources for anybody who wants to know more. The gist of it is the concept that education is meaningful when the students actually see themselves as part of the process. Now, that could be everything from they see themselves in the textbook, like in the examples given in the textbook. That's something that's very common in OER as a whole. It also can be part of how you do assignments and assessments in the course. So one of the things that I like doing, for example, in my interlinguistics course, I have certain quiz questions that I want my students to be able to do. But then other quiz elements, I open up to them. I ask them, how would they define these things? And then ask them, okay, now let's make a test question out of it. Let's use it to create our review study materials. Another way to do this would be storytelling. That's actually one of my favorite ways to do this in a language classroom, where for every single class I teach, it doesn't matter what level, we have some kind of prompt I give them at the beginning. We work on it throughout the semester. Part of their final grade is the final product. And that final product turns out to be basically a series of stories. Now, depending on the level, depends on what they're doing exactly. But in having that as part of the model, I'm not writing a final exam necessarily. In fact, I gave up exams years ago. Instead, I like these meaningful projects. And these meaningful projects make it so that the students are applying the knowledge directly, and they're doing so in ways that are actually meaningful. They see how they can take this information and apply it in their own lives from their own experiences.
What's amazing about this is one of the things that we're talking about is authentic assessment and how to make our assignments more AI resistant so that we're not just putting something in that students can potentially put into AI and then just copy paste it and walk away and be done. And something like this is 1,000% on.
Exactly.
Because it is their own experiences and their own applications, right? Our students, and they're co-creating this knowledge and sharing it with each other versus just, again, simply plug in a prompt, copy and pasting.
There's always going to be certain areas where writing an essay or taking an exam are still going to be useful in certain disciplines for certain tasks. But the more that we can get into using authentic assessments, this is how we do a number of things, including combat, it might be a little bit too strong a word, but certainly address the concept of using AI to cheat or using the large language models to cheat. The more you get students incorporating their own perspectives, their own experiences, and their own ways of understanding, not only are you making a more inclusive learning environment, you are also making it personal, which brings down the learner affect, which that's that series of complex emotions that we feel when we feel like we can't do something. Like I'm bad at math, or I'm bad at languages, or I'm bad at art. That's learner affect. And the more we make an assignment and a series of assignments more personal, where students are taking that knowledge and applying it and showcasing how they understand, the more we do that, the less learner affect can take hold and fossilize the learning.
We talk about OER, and you explained OER, ZTE, zero textbook costs.
Correct.
Sometimes I see them used interchangeably. How are they not?
I explain it, and I have to give a big shout out to one of my colleagues at Skyline College, Amy Maloney. She has a graphic that she created called the ZTC Wheel. And it's the ways that you can make a course zero textbook cost, or ZTC. And OER is one of the spokes of that wheel.
Oh.
So using open educational resources is one way because, well, It's free to use for everyone, which means there's no cost to the student. And that's really what zero textbook cost stands for, is somehow the learning materials, students are able to use them freely. Now, there's a number of elements, and this is a graphic that if you put in ZTC Wheel and Amy Maloney, you will into your search engine of choice, you hopefully will find it. It includes things like library resources, so the subscription services that the libraries use, both for ebooks, journal articles, artwork. There's Art Store is a really amazing one. They have streaming movie subscriptions. They've got audiobook subscriptions. There's so many different things that the college libraries have access to. There's materials that the instructors themselves create. There's materials that the students create. Then you have also general public access materials. So this could be something like one of my colleagues in political science does her course completely zero cost. And what she uses are, for example, in American politics, she uses the Constitution, and you can find that anywhere online for free, open access, right? That's public access materials. So there are these ways to create a course as zero cost. Yes, of course, you can do some of it by purchasing a whole slew of textbooks for that course, but that's not very sustainable. Zero textbook cost courses are meant to be sustainably so, meaning you consistently are giving money to the library to maintain the subscriptions. You are using open educational resources. You are continuing to use the materials that the instructor creates or that the student creates.
I had really not heard of OER and ZTC until I got back to California.
Right.
Why do you think there's such a push for it here? Why do we think as a state system, the California community colleges really thinks this is so important and are pushing it to this level?
There's a number of factors in this. California is certainly one of the main leaders. I would be remiss if I didn't talk about Open Oregon, which is the Oregon higher education system. Their community colleges, Oregon State and University of Oregon systems, they're big into this. Washington State as well, Texas, New York, British Columbia, and Ontario up in Canada. There's so many different entities as well. Like I said, OER have been around for 20 plus years, but the big push really came about 10 years ago, and it started in California and a couple other states, where the realization that the textbook companies were charging so much for their materials, and it was not addressing major areas. Study after study showed that students were either not purchasing textbooks, or they were purchasing textbooks but then not able to afford basic life necessities like food, medication, rent, etc., transportation, childcare costs. The list goes on. And that this was having a significant impact for students. You had many students coming out of high school putting off college, even community college, because they could not afford the textbooks. Students dropping classes or taking the class into a certain point and then withdrawing because they knew they couldn't afford the textbooks. So California had a pilot about 10 years ago in zero textbook costs that focused on the community colleges and the California State University system, the CSU system. There were similar pilots happening also, like I said, in Oregon and a few other states. It really comes down to that. It's something that has been around for quite some time, meaning I remember being a college student in the 90s. I was on student aid. I definitely did not have the materials that I needed most of the time. I was borrowing from the library constantly because it was either pay my rent or pay for this textbook. And since my student loan check didn't come in on time right at the beginning of the quarter, because I went to a college that was on quarter system, I basically had to make those same choices too. And it just keeps getting worse and worse. So as the publisher companies keep getting more and more expensive with their materials and create these subscription models that are still gouging students constantly, the focus was, well, what can we do? And we have professional professors. And yes, of course, in transfer level, most, everybody has a master's. Many of us have PhDs or EDDs, some other doctorate. Even in the career technical areas where you have people who have been teaching for years and years, they can write the textbook themselves. So let's do it. Let's come together and let's make that push.
And one of the two classes you talked about that were at University of Texas, where you did a lot of work, is universal design and fair use.
Yeah.
How those both pipe into this, and what are those, and why do we need them as we create?
There are two important elements, but they are distinctly different elements. Let's start with fair use. Fair use is connected to copyright. Not just in the US, but in many countries around the world. If you write something, the default is that it is automatically copyrighted by the person who created it. That material, that means that you reserve, as the author, you reserve all the rights on how that gets used. As an educator, we do have in the US, and it has to be specific on this, we do have this concept of fair use, which is to say that if I want to, I'm just going to pick randomly. I want to teach a course and I want to use Toni Morrison's Beloved as a text. Well, I can share a certain amount of that with my students directly, even though it is a copyrighted material. I can share a small amount, but I'm very limited in how I do that. There is no set percentage as to how much it is. There's often, some people will say it's 10% of the material. I would figure like a page or two, maybe some cases. Really depends on what you're talking about. You can do this for the purposes of teaching. You can do this for the purposes of making a parody of something. So for example, the one I like talking about is Weird Al Yankovic yes, he has to get permission from those artists before he makes his parody songs. Mm-hmm. But technically, does he have to? It's probably a good idea that he does, but he is making a parody. And so he can do some things through fair use. Fair use is an important element, and it's something that when you are first taught how to teach, many people are not really trained in copyright and fair use. And I'm going to be very clear on record and say I am not an expert, right? I am not a lawyer. I am certainly not a copyright lawyer. I am not an expert. And I often turn to my library colleagues who do work with this all the time. Especially at Cañada College, we have a number of our librarians who are very well versed in copyright and fair use. So it's really important as we talk about course materials, we have to be very careful. Yes, we can share some things with our students, but we have to be careful what we share with them and how we share with them. You can't just make a photocopy of the first 5 chapters of a text and give it to your students. That's probably going to be against copyright. You're violating copyright law at that point. But could you share a little bit of it in order to tide the students over before they are able to purchase it? Maybe. That might be a conversation you have to have with some of the library folks on your campus. So that's fair use. Universal design for learning is a whole other thing. It is kind of what the title implies, meaning you are creating a learning environment where everyone can learn. And now that applies to how people process information. That applies to whether somebody may or may not have a disability, whether it's an obvious or visible disability versus one that you may not notice upon looking at them or listening to them talk. Certainly, it gets at the heart of how an educator disseminates information. Do you give them a barrage, as I call it, an avalanche of words all at once, and they're trying to parse out the information as it is rushing towards them? Or UDL, Universal Design for Learning, is all about chunking that information, scaffolding it in a way that you show the progression of skills, of information, but you also refer back to elements that they had learned before. So Universal Design for Learning is all about thinking about how you are presenting that information and including as many people as possible.
These are both so important for OER creation. And number one, don't get in trouble. And number two, obviously accessibility and usability across the board instead of just for a smaller margin of our folks, our students. What is so fascinating about everything that you're talking about is now the possibility that we can customize learning even more. If you think about it, universal design means everyone can access it. But then AI allows us to really dial in so that it's customized and even to a point where we might even bespoke it, right? And bespoke meaning it's just for that one person. What do you think about that? Is that good? Is that bad? Are we going to get there? Is that the future of OER?
I think it has a potential to get there. I don't know that I like talking about it in so concrete a manner, but certainly a potential. I think of a couple of different projects that are currently happening. One is, for example, LibreTexts, which is one of the main repositories and platforms for open educational resources, both the textbooks and they have a homework platform as well and a number of other elements besides. One of the goals of the founder and CEO of LibreTexts, his name is Dr. Delmar Larson. He's a professor of chemistry at UC Davis. One of his goals is just to remove barriers, period. So he includes the fact that not only are there multiple libraries that house a number of disciplines, but he also has a library for Spanish. And I don't mean Spanish like learning how to speak Spanish. I mean the textbooks that have been published in the other libraries, having them translated into Spanish. And this is done predominantly by machines, meaning he's using a large language model translator, and they are taking these books and they are translating them. Are they a perfect translation? No. I think human language changes in multiple and various ways. And so having a large language model keep up may not always happen, or it may not. I'm not sure. My crystal ball is fuzzy. I can't see that far in the future. But certainly it's this concept of it does a really good job. I know that one of my colleagues in early childhood education was concerned about a couple of the textbooks about whether the Spanish was appropriate enough, had the same rigor and the same formality and complexity that the English did. And I went through a couple of the textbooks and they were great. They were really solid to the point that I could see I'm teaching the class in English. I'm using the English text as a required source, but an optional source is the Spanish one, and here it is. At LibreTexts, they have a Spanish library. They have a Ukrainian library. I believe they're working on creating a couple more fuller libraries. I'm not sure which other languages they have right now, but that's the work that they're doing. And that's removing barriers in ways that, honestly, even 5 years ago, I would have said, I don't know if they're up to the task, if these LLMs are quite up to the task to that. They're really close, I would say now. The other thing that's really important is the creation of the textbook itself. For example, I am, among many hats that I wear, I am a technical editor. So the layout of that text and how the different chapters and different pages should work, how the images should look and be set, how tables and charts and all the different pieces that you see when you read a textbook, whether it's in print or on the screen, that is something that 99.99% of people don't know how to do. It is very technical. It is really difficult to get all of the pieces in place. This is something that AI is starting to help us with now, and I can only wait to have everything done so that if I just take a Word document or Google document, have my text ready and say, I want this chart here and these other pieces, and it automatically is done. That's AI coming to full force in OER.
That would be brilliant, because I think a lot of times as teachers, we're writing for content on what we think looks good on a page without thinking about that layout. That's what's going to cause the back end to hiccup, right? That will not allow these things to happen. And I think I shared with you how one of my passion projects at Antelope Valley College is to create OER and have Spanish versions available for all the ancillary materials as well. So not just the book itself, but all the test questions, all the study guides, all the PowerPoints. And if we could get away with it, if we have the budget, multimedia, so that it's produced both ways in multiple languages, then it's not just one piece, right? Then it allows teachers to adopt this, maybe who don't have the time to write something for themselves, who don't have the time to do test questions, who don't have the time to create their own slides. So we're hoping that that is removing a barrier to adoption.
I would agree. And I think there's multiple pieces to that. There is the imposter syndrome element of, I'm just a teacher. I can't possibly write a text. Yes, you can. And this will help you. I think that's a really huge piece. And I can't count the number of times I've talked with colleagues in a variety of disciplines, especially at the community colleges, where they figure, well, that's what the four-year professors do. I just teach. And it kills me. There's a part of me inside that dies when I hear something like that. I'm talking to somebody who has been teaching this discipline, these courses, for 10, 15, 20, 30 years even. You can't sit there and tell me they don't know this material. Of course they do. More importantly, they know how to teach. And if you know how to teach, there has to be a way to be able to take that and put it into book form, to get that knowledge shareable to as many people as possible.
And if we think about it, so many newer teachers, I am lucky enough to do a lot of observations of our adjunct faculty, of our newer faculty, and I will literally steal. Oh my gosh, I love the way you do this. May I borrow? May I steal? Please, may I just take this? Yes, some of us have had experience for years and years and years, decades even, and multiple decades. Just amazing sharing of knowledge. And just this whole idea just came into my head is what if we could put this together somewhere, right? Where we can say, this is the way to teach this thing. This is the way to do this wonderful group project. And of course, everybody lives group projects, right? There's always one person that does everything, four other people that don't do anything, right? The way that they structure this forces everybody to do their own thing.
And this is where the power of something like Creative Commons licensing comes in, which is an alternative to copyright. Creative Commons licensing allows, depending on which flavor you choose, which options you choose, allows you to share and share widely and be able to take someone's material and, given the permissions of the licensing they put on it, take it and make it yours in some way, shape, or form. So for example, about 4 or 5 years ago, when I first really learned about Creative Commons licensing, I started taking my syllabus, anything that I create for any of my courses, all of it has a CC BY and C license. What does that mean? CC, Creative Commons. BY, it means that it's an attribution. If you take this and make it yours, you have to give an attribution to me, saying you got it from me. NC, non-commercial. So a for-profit publisher can't take this, slap it into their textbook or ancillaries, and put a copyright license on it and make money off of it. Why? Because I want people to be able to take my work and make it their own. I'm fine with it. I don't care. I am certainly not precious with that. Because if I were, I feel like that would be contrary to literally everything that every single one of my teachers, professors, mentors, everyone who has helped informed my educational processes, it just violates that trust that they put into me of trying to teach me how to do things in a different way. And I would agree that at not just the people who came before us, but the people who are coming up now and next, creating opportunities and spaces for collaboration, which is the power of OER, and being able to do it in a way that's sustainable, that continues to give attribution, but that allows people to continue to take this work, progress it, and move it forward. The storytelling idea I talked about earlier from my Spanish classes, that was not my idea. That's an idea I got from someone else. They had their flavor of it, and that was from an ESL course. I decided to take it and make it something I could use in not just one of my more advanced Spanish classes. In fact, I do it with my first semester Spanish classes. My students just last week wrote a very basic, their own version of the Three Little Pigs and the Wolf.
Hmm.
At the end of the semester, we'll come back, we'll add to it more because, well, they'll have more vocabulary, they'll have more grammar, they'll be able to create more in the story. And they can say at the end of the semester, I wrote a story in Spanish. I've only had one semester and I wrote a story in Spanish.
How cool is that?
Exactly.
It's not just, how are you? Then I can order from a menu and where's the doctor and where's the bathroom, right? I did something creative with this and that's mine. It's all mine.
Exactly. And I not only did that, I can take those skills, I can tell my own story about my life and what I'm doing right now. When I teach the second semester course, it's a lot of past tense. Instead, we focus on Little Red Riding Hood. So at the beginning of the semester, we go through the various elements of past tense in Spanish, and then we get to stuff like recommendations and reactions and wishes and hopes. And we take that same story and then we progress the story a little bit more. For my second year students, now they've got a lot more grammar and a lot more vocab. So I do things like I'll give them a fairy tale, a classic European fairy tale, but I'll tell them you have to make your version of the story. And you need to include certain elements. And these are the topics we're talking about this semester. It could have to do with what is identity and how different Spanish-speaking cultures express their identities in different ways. It could be food. One of my favorite ones is to give them examples of a myth about food, and then they create their own myth about a food or an ingredient element that is native to Latin America, and have them come up with the story. Not my story, not the official story, not the story that has been told in Mayan-based cultures for centuries. No, their story. Take that. Now you're asking the student with each one of these story type assessments, you're asking them, yes, to use the vocab and grammar they've learned and the concepts and ideas they've learned, but you've also shown them how to tell their own stories, but their own lives, about the people around them, totally made up stories about who knows what. They can start doing this. Now you've made the language tangible and meaningful, not just this list of rules and list of vocabs, and somehow you throw them into a blender and see what comes out. No, you're using the language as it is. It's a tool. If language is a tool, using that tool is a skill, and that's all you're teaching.
I want to go back to what you said earlier about, yes, it translates and it's good. My question then is, when we translate something, the current usage will always change. And we've lived in different parts of the US, right? There is a distinct difference between English spoken in Texas and the English spoken in California, right? Soda, pop, Coke.
Bless your heart.
Bless your heart, y'all. All y'alls. Actually, that's more East Coast. And
no, yeah, y'all is singular in Texas, right? Don't you know?
Yeah, y'all is singular. All y'alls is the plural.
All y'all's plural.
All y'all's plural, and a whole list of different words. So it would be impossible to ask any human, let alone any large language model, to translate, because there's just so many different ways that we say things. Even California, we're in the same state, Northern Cal versus Southern Cal, right? We have different ways of saying things.
So language always changes. I think that's the first rule to start with. Language always changes. And it's not that language has a mind and a conscience, that it's that speech community. So literally the community that uses that form of speech communities change. They either bring in elements from the outside or they change internally. There's constantly change. At the time that their change stops, the language is dead, or the dialect is dead. If you're talking about just certain dialect, a smaller speech community out of a larger one. So you're right. There's never going to be a time that we 100% keep up with everything. However, this is where, as the large language models become more and more sophisticated, which literally is happening in minutes anymore instead of years, as that happens, they're able to pull more and more data on language use. There's questions as to how that's being done, and those are very important questions to ask. But regardless, they're still able to pull, even from the public sphere, they're still able to pull as many usages as possible, analyze them, showcase the context, and in doing so, are able to try at least to keep up. Will it ever be 100% perfect? No. But will it be close? Yeah.
And you talked about how language is a tool and the ability to use it as a skill. How do you think, especially the way we communicate with AI now, we ask for things from AI. We no longer have to type in codes. We can talk to our data. We can talk to our computers. We can make requests of them. How do you think specifically our areas of communication and linguistics, which are, like we're not even sister disciplines, we're so close.
We are.
What do we have in this future of technology when we talk to our computers?
I think it's a huge barrier that is broken, basically. It's broken down. And it gets back to that same concept of learner affect. I giggle every time I see somebody who will flat out tell you they are not good with technology, but they pick up a modern smartphone. It could be, doesn't matter, iOS, Android, doesn't matter what the platform is. They pick up a modern smartphone, are able with 3 or 4 pushes, once you show them just a basic, here's how you turn it on, here's how you get to the menu, here's how to make a phone call. And then inside of a month, they have figured out well more than just making that phone call. They have figured it out. It doesn't matter if we're talking about a younger person, middle-aged person, older person, it doesn't matter the age. It has to do with the experience. I think the more that we break down the barriers and make it so that, again, going back to this concept of universal design for learning, right? When you make the process universal, that just about anybody, you show them a couple different things and you can get the rest of it, at least to a very basic level. The more you can do that, the better this gets. It will be awesome, like I said, in these next few years when we can just say, hey, insert computer name, whatever, whatever model you're using. I know, hey, phone, hey, whatever. I want to do this. Can you help me? And the bot comes back with, yes, of course. Let's talk about this. And there's an actual conversation between the person and the bot to get a task done, and not just do it at a basic level, but to do it with some flair, with some complexity. We're not that far away from that. And this is mind-blowing to me. This week was the birthday of a great aunt of mine who passed away several years ago. She would have been 114, but she passed away at just shy of 102. So she lived a very long life. She famously retired. She was an accountant and bookkeeper for years and years, but famously retired when electric typewriters came into the office.
Yes.
She was famously like no technology, right? I mean, this is a woman who had a rotary dial telephone to the day that she moved out of her apartment to a retirement home. I mean, this is somebody who just did not do technology at all. And I was thinking, her birthday is kind of a special day for my family. And I was thinking about what she would do if somebody had put a smartphone in her hand. If she was still not 114, if let's say she was 60 or so, right? Mm-hmm. What would she do? Would she freak out? Or if you showed her and just kind of guided her a little bit, would she just interact with it anyway? And if you showed her, hey, Aunt Mary, guess what? You push this button, you talk to the computer, and it helps you do things. And towards the last couple decades of her life, she had a lot of physical challenges. Like, to be able to, for her to have said, push this button and the bot will turn on the stove to fire up the oven so that she can get started with some basic cooking elements, or to turn on the microwave to heat something up. The fact that we can do this now, I think that would have been just game changing. So the fact that we are pretty much at the precipice of that. For some people, they do have it. Some others want something a little bit more sophisticated than what we currently have. We're at the precipice of this. We are breaking barriers, and this is amazing.
And we're going to get there. Even last year, I was playing with a translator tool. It was nowhere near this good.
No.
Last year, I was not able to create slides as we're able to do now.
Agreed. Yeah.
I have had to change one of my assignment parameters for creating slides because in the past we did them ourselves. It was 6 by 6, right? You've heard of this, 6 words
Yep.
per line and then 6 lines. But now AI can lay out slides in ways that we don't need to obey that rule because we're not laying it out ourselves. And it's still perfectly legible and you're using graphic arts and it looks amazing. So I had to tell my class, this is a rule from last semester. It is no longer applicable because of the way AI can make our slides now. And this changed within a matter of one semester.
Yeah.
And how long have we had that rule? I mean, you've been in academia. I mean, it's been around.
I honestly don't remember a time it didn't exist. How about that one? Since we had PowerPoint.
Agreed. And so this is one of our like babies, right? It's like, don't do this. It's gone.
Yeah. I have the same conversation, especially when we get to, this is the first semester in a while that I've taught the first semester Spanish course. And it's that conversation at the beginning of the semester where when I realized how much closer even Google Translate, which is still not very good, I will openly say, Google, if you're listening, you still got some work to do on that one. But it's so much better than it was even 6 months ago, as you just said. And so I had that conversation with my students. You know, there's 35 people in a room, and I sat them down and said, okay, why are you here?
Mm-hmm.
If it's just to be able to translate things, you've already got an app for that. You don't need to be in here. This is why if I catch you doing it, you're going to see a side of me you're not going to like. You know, this is not going to be good for you because you're wasting your time, not just mine. You're wasting your time.
Yes.
If it's just about, I want to say this in Spanish, you can already do it. The question is, if you're in the physical classroom to learn a language, you're doing it because you want to actually do it without the translator.
Yes.
And so I definitely see that where it's like, you know, for my classes, yes, my students have to do presentations. I don't care. I care. I have certain elements as to what their slides should look like.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
They don't have to have the graphic elements. And I always created a very basic PowerPoint and very basic Google Slides, you know, black and white, just put text in, just so for those students who never learned how to do slides and never wanted to learn how to do slides, right? Now I can say, you know, go to Canva and use the AI tool in Canva to create the slide deck or Google Slides or whatever your choice may be.
I think eventually, because we have so many tools, we'll probably consolidate into one or two big tools. Kind of like, you know, we had like WordStar, WordPerfect, the little word processor that wasn't a computer.
Yep.
And now we have, you know, Microsoft Word and Google Docs. I think one of the things you said that was so important is how these tools, right? You touched on the cheating aspect. Like, just don't do it in here because it's not worth, why bother? How would you address, because when we talk about AI, especially in academia, and if you read the news, that's the only thing that comes up, right? Over and over again. So-and-so just got sued, this high school, that college, suing for this, that, and the other. And it always has to do with the negative aspect of cheating. And we talked about this yes, there are always going to be people who use tools uncritically or not from a critical perspective and just, you know, want to get past things. But what about some equity issues? Especially when it comes to AI usage and things like Dragon that have been around for a long time and adaptive tools that are now being more AI based.
It is a huge game changer. So there are a number of tools, adaptive technology tools that our students use, that general people use, and they're all AI based anymore. And if they aren't, they will be soon. Just because the power of these large language models makes it so that you can do so much more with so much less. And to do it at a price point that more and more people can afford. I know earlier you and I were talking about how Dragon, when that first came out, that speech to text was so amazing and really expensive that most people could not afford. And even the cheap, so-called cheap version was not cheap. It was still, you know, a sizable chunk of money. And if you were a student who was constantly broke, you weren't going to be able to have it.
Mm-mm.
Flash forward to now, where all of our smartphones have speech to text. Doesn't matter what platform you're on. They
Mm-hmm.
all have speech to text. It's once it learns your pronunciation, it gets better and better. Once it knows that you are multilingual, it starts adapting for that too. There's a lot of times where I'll be texting with some of my friends and we'll go back and forth in English and Spanish. And if we're using speech to text, it is actually changing so that it knows when we're speaking English, when we're speaking Spanish. So these are all tools that are absolutely addressing the equity issue with respect to accessibility. And in this case, this is accessibility in both senses. You have access to the technology, and it makes it so that you can access the information, access the assignment, you can understand what's happening, and you can participate fully. It is an absolute game changer. And it is one of these questions that when I work with faculty who are very reticent about the use of AI, they just think of AI as this gigantic umbrella that encompasses everything evil. I remind them that, for example, they have students who are using screen readers. Those screen readers are more often than not AI based.
Mm-hmm.
Some of their students are using speech to text because they have some kind of processing disorder that keeps them from writing and speaking out. They're dictating their comments, their essays, etc., is something they can do. Well, those tools, those speech to text tools, are almost all of them AI based. And the list goes on and on and on. If nothing else, one of the lessons we all have learned from the pandemic is how many people use and need adaptive technology.
Yes.
For any number of reasons. And how many people don't even realize that when they're looking at the captions for a video, when they are looking at the tooltip sometimes, when you hover over something and it gives you the information, many times that's AI based. And that's not a bad thing. That's a good thing.
Mm-hmm.
So when we have those conversations and there's a faculty member who's rightly scared, I don't wish to belittle their fears on this because it is important. Our students do need to show that they have taken in the information and they understand it and they apply it. That is what our grades are based off of. That's what our student learning outcomes are based off of. It's important for accreditation and everything else. But to say just no to AI or to be instantly skeptical of anything AI, I think does a disservice. We talk about critical thinking with respect to AI is about whether it's giving you something that is important or useful or accurate. But I think the other side is equally important, that you can't just be dismissive of something. I'm not a Grammarly Go fan, but at the same time, if it's helping a given student who's having real issues communicating, and it's helping them see ways of taking their words and expanding their vocabularies, expanding their knowledge of grammatical structures, if that tool is helping them do that, then that's not a bad thing. There's ways to address this and not just do a blanket no AI statement.
Linguistics goes back so far. And where we're headed with the future and talking to computers and using this as a potential tool to, communication and language, that it's now a tool to empower us so that we no longer have to code, right? I think you and I, when we look at code, we are probably both thinking, no, please, dear God, no. But
Not going to happen.
Not going to happen. And the fact that you and I can both talk to our computers now by using natural language in our different languages is so empowering.
It's empowering, and it's empowering as the educator. It's empowering as the student. It's empowering as random person who just wants to learn just a little bit of something. It's there right at your fingertips.
We all want to be lifelong learners, and this just makes it easier.
Agreed.
So where do you think, again, not crystal ball, but just where do you think we're going to be? Where do you want us to be in terms of AI and education and linguistics and communication 6 months, a year? And we won't go further than that because who knows what's going to happen. But 6 months in a year, where do you think we're going to be? Where would you want us to be?
I mean, in 5 years, we could be having that Star Trek ship's computer. So there's a few things. I see, number one, what I hope, and I'm starting to see this in many circles, but the more we do professional development trainings, getting people to hands-on, whether it's artificial intelligence, AR, VR, XR, so any of that realm as well, getting people to play with it. One of my colleagues at Cañada, Professor Hyla Lacefield, she is the head of the Digital Arts and Animation Department. And it is her mission to get every single person on our campus into a virtual reality lab with a headset on, playing with the stuff.
Yes.
And the cutest thing is when you get this person, especially one of the administrators who's very tight-laced and just will not have a sense of humor on a lot of things, like seems very serious. And then you get them with a VR headset and have them playing. They turn back into a kid. They turn into a kid again. So I think the more you play with this, I'm not going to say everybody's going to get perfectly comfortable with it, because that's not going to be the case. But you start understanding elements that are really positive and aspects where we do need to be critical. There's no question we have to continue and go expand on teaching critical thinking skills, information literacy skills. These are really, really important. Not just because you're interacting with an AI chatbot and it's giving you information, you have to decide whether it's important or not, but the fact that our information in general comes from a variety of sources. This is an important skill set that every single human being needs to be proficient on. And it doesn't matter your background, what you do for a living or don't, your age, anything about you. You need to have those critical thinking and information literacy skills. You need to understand where the information is coming from and whether it is something you should put trust into or whether you should be more skeptical about. AI can help with this, but it's the training that comes with it. So I think in the next 6 months to a year, this is where I see a big expansion. And part of that is kind of touching back on what we said of knowing and understanding how AI is beneficial in certain aspects. My husband has a number of challenges, physical disability as well as neural processing issues. And one of the tools he uses is something that helps him be able to take information and parse it just a little bit into bigger chunks and smaller chunks, depending on his needs that day. To be able, and that's AI based.
Mm-hmm.
And if he's having a day where he's in a lot of pain or he's very tired because he didn't sleep well the night before, he's able to use this kind of tool to help him understand what is going on. This is really important. To be able to continue this, just being a lifelong learner and understanding information as you get it, these tools can help. So I think the more professional development that we allow and encourage and promote our colleagues to participate in, the better this is going to be. It allows us to understand what's happening as well as to come up with really truthfully critical questions to ask. I think linguistically, this is changing so rapidly. It's really clear that right now, if you speak a major language, so I'm talking about English, Spanish, French, German, Japanese, Mandarin, Russian, to a lesser extent, Arabic as well, and a few others. If you speak one of those languages at a native or near native level, you've got an AI bot at your fingertips that works beautifully. Other languages, you're starting to get it as well. Again, another barrier breaking down. To be able to have that at your fingertips, regardless of what language you speak, this will be huge.
I never thought about it that way because two of the languages, my bad Spanish, my bad Chinese, are all within the majors.
Yes.
I'm set. And
You kind of are.
Right, I'm set. I can mix all three and I'm fine. But I just didn't think about it that way. What other languages is it not able to interact in for now, but it's getting there?
It's getting there in a number of languages. And so I pulled from the major language. Oh, Hindi. Forgot about Hindi. Sorry, Hindi speakers. You're in there too. But these are also where you think about the technology centers in the world.
Yes.
They're in places where these languages are being spoken. So, right? So they're in English-speaking countries, Spanish-speaking countries, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So that's where the coding is coming in, and that's where we're going to see some big gains. We will also find more and more gains with respect to even less commonly spoken languages, and especially, here's where I'm really excited, endangered languages. The power and ability for somebody who speaks an endangered language to be able to not just get it documented well, but have it thrive, maybe be able to use these AI-based tools to revitalize the language and keep it going. I mean, there's so many possible avenues here.
I was just thinking what you said about who has access. And I clone my voice extensively for my videos. Is it able to mimic the way I talk and able to recreate my voice because I'm using English? If I used, what you said wasn't in the major languages, would it have that ability?
I think it's getting there. Not my exact realm of knowledge. I suspect it's probably pretty close.
I'm really curious, and different speech patterns, right? Because this is my voice. I talk like this because I got to the US at a young age, right? So I can mimic the American accent pretty well. I lived in Ohio for 3.5 years, so I really got it down pat. And North American Standard? What is it called?
You typically go by geopolitical boundaries. So you say American mainstream English, Canadian mainstream English, et cetera, et cetera.
So the American mainstream, and I have that down. So what if you didn't have that? What would it do? And how comfortable would you be in allowing your voice to be cloned if you didn't sound like this?
I think part of the answer is that it's already here, in the sense that the speech to text apps are able to work very well, whether you are speaking a language that you are native or near native in, or I've seen even some of our ESL students who are using speech to text in English, and it's generally picking up what the students are saying, even though many others might, humans might have problems understanding what the person's trying to say. The speech to text is picking it up. I know that for my students, the courses I teach all use exercises we have on Adapt, which is the homework platform that LibreTexts has. Anything that they record, especially through their Discuss It question type, gets automatically transcribed and captioned. And it's an AI-based tool that does it. And it actually helps me, because when a student does not pronounce something well, it shows up and I look at the transcript and I'm like, that's not a word in Spanish, or that word does not work with the context that they're using it in. So I can listen to it. So where I'm going with this is, we already kind of have that working. It's just a matter of getting the different large language models up to speed on all of the different languages, all 6,000 or however many.
I know a lot of my relatives are afraid to communicate because of accents. I got here young enough that I sound like this. I love that this will potentially remove a barrier.
Absolutely. And think of it this way. If you're trying to communicate in English and it's not coming across, to be able to use a speech to text, to be able to document what you're trying to say and have that other person you're trying to talk to be able to understand what it is you're actually trying to say, that in itself helps. It also allows you to see how you can improve your pronunciation. Even 6 months ago, most of these pronunciation apps, massive air quotes, taught you how to speak that language, and they were terrible. They were so atrociously bad. Now they have improved so much, and it's because of AI tools that are running in the background to be able to pick up on nuance, particularly with vowels, with how you pronounce consonants in different ways. What works in American English may not work in South Asian English, or what works for Korean may not work for Japanese, and all the fun things that go along with it.
I'm going back to Star Trek, right? The universal translators, right?
It is.
That utopia, it's happening.
We're almost there.
So let me kind of wrap with this. We have all these AI tools. If you could tell the AI companies, this is a tool I need for OER creation, what would you want this tool to be? What would you like, kind of like the wish list, Dr. Harmon wish list?
I think it touches on what I highlighted earlier, which is anything that allows people to take what they have written text-wise and lay it out into whether it's printed book versus ebook, whether it is podcast, whether it is whatever format they're looking to use and interact with people. So for the AI bot to be able to make this into whatever layout you want for whatever the purpose, and to adapt for language, for accessibility, for any possible permutation. For a bot to be able to do that, that would be brilliant.
Beauteous, completely lovely, completely wonderful. Dr. Harmon, thank you so much for your time, your amazing insights. We went from language, Star Trek, OER, ZTC, into the future, into all these different ways of understanding what might happen in our very near future. I really appreciate your time and your insights.
Thank you, Dr. Jones.
Thanks so much for tuning in to the Innovating Higher Ed podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, please consider subscribing and sharing it with your colleagues and friends. Be sure to join us for our next episode as we boldly explore new frontiers in educational innovation. We would like to thank one of our founding supporters for this episode, the largest system of higher education in the nation, the California Community Colleges.